On a scorching summer afternoon, I sat cross-legged on my worn-out couch, grading piano assignments, while the old ceiling fan hummed lazily above me. The apartment was small, but cozy, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and sheet music scattered around. My 10-year-old son, Max, burst into the room, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Mom, look," he exclaimed, holding up his latest science project, a homemade volcano. He had poured baking soda and vinegar into the crater, and the red foam was bubbling over, spilling onto the table. I smiled, adjusting my glasses. "That's amazing, Max. Mr. Lewis is going to be really impressed." Just as he beamed with pride, my phone rang. The screen flashed, "Mom, our weekly scheduled call." With a sigh, I answered. "Hey, Mom. Emma, darling." My mother's voice carried its usual enthusiasm. "Uncle Peter's wedding is finally set. Next month. In Miami. At this stunning resort. You and Max are coming, right?" I hesitated. As a high school music teacher, I barely made enough to cover rent, let alone afford a luxurious trip. "Mom, I don't know if we'll cover the expenses," she interrupted quickly. "It's important that the whole family is there. Your sister, Olivia, and her husband are coming too. And of course, Ethan will be there." At the mention of Olivia, my stomach twisted. My perfect, successful older sister, married to a thriving entrepreneur, living in an upscale neighborhood, sending her 12-year-old son, Carter, to an elite private school. Meanwhile, I had struggled for the last 5 years as a single mom after my ex-husband, Eric, walked out on us. I exhaled. "All right, we'll be there." After hanging up, I collapsed into the couch, already dreading the reunion. I loved my mother, but she had always made it clear Olivia was the golden child, the one who made the right choices. I, on the other hand, was the dreamer who had wasted potential by choosing teaching over a more practical career. "Are we really going to Florida?" Max's voice cut through my thoughts. "Yes, kiddo. We are." His face lit up. "Can we go to the beach?" I forced a smile. "Of course. And Carter will be there?" His excitement dimmed slightly. "Yes, he will." Max bit his lip. He always makes fun of me. I squeezed his hand. "People like Carter think what you own matters more than who you are. But we know better, right?" Max nodded, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes stung. The next morning, as I was making breakfast, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Olivia. "Mom told me you're coming. Carter is looking forward to playing with Max." I stared at the words, knowing full well Carter didn't play with Max, he belittled him. A few days later, Mom called again. "Emma, I've made all the travel arrangements," she said over the phone. "Olivia and her family are flying first class from New York. Your father and I are flying too." One swallowed. "And us?" A brief pause. "I think it would be best if you and Max took the bus." I gripped the phone tighter. "The bus?" "Yes, dear. It's much cheaper, and I know money's been tight for you. This way, you won't have to worry about the expense." A 12-hour bus ride, while Olivia and the rest of the family soared in comfort above the clouds. Of course. "All right, Mom," I said quietly. "We'll take the bus." That evening, I sat Max down. "So, about the Florida trip. We'll be going by bus." His face scrunched in confusion. "But that's really long, right?" "Yes, but we'll see the scenery, read, and play games. It'll be fun." Max tilted his head. "How is Carter getting there?" I hesitated. "They're flying." He frowned. "Why aren't we flying?" I forced a light shrug. "Because buses are an adventure." Max thought for a moment, then nodded slightly, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes. The morning of our departure arrived. The bus terminal was located inside the airport, where the whole family was meeting before their flights. As we entered the lobby, Olivia stood poised in a designer outfit, her husband Ethan beside her, scrolling through his phone. Carter, immersed in his expensive tablet, barely glanced up. "There you are," Olivia said, her tone vaguely dismissive. "Our check-in is about to start." I nodded. "Morning." "We've been so busy," she said, with that practiced air of effortless success. "Ethan just closed a major deal, and Carter just got accepted into an elite robotics program." I forced a smile. "That's great." Carter barely looked up. "Hey." Max offered a small hi, his posture stiff. Mom turned to me. "Your bus leaves at 9, right?" "Yes." "Good, that'll get you there just in time for the wedding." Then Olivia smirked. "Why are you taking the bus? Flights are so much faster." Before I could answer, Mom chuckled. "Well, business class wasn't exactly in Emma's budget." I felt the heat rise in my face. Olivia's eyes flickered with amusement. Carter wrinkled his nose. Buses stink. We took one for a school trip, and it smelled like feet. Ethan let out a short laugh. Olivia joined in, shaking her head as if this was all harmless fun. Max stiffened beside me. I squeezed his hand and forced a steady voice. "Come on, Max. Let's head to the terminal." As we turned away, I heard Olivia's voice, dripping with faux politeness. "Enjoy your bus ride, Emma." I didn't look back. No one was there to see us off. We boarded the bus, the worn-out seats, a stark contrast to the plush first-class lounges. My family was probably enjoying. I turned to Max, determined to make the best of it. "All right, kiddo, let's make this an adventure." I had barely opened a book when a voice from the seat next to us spoke. "That's a wonderful idea." I turned to see an elderly gentleman with silver hair and kind blue eyes smiling warmly. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "Mind if I join you too?" I shook his hand, a strange feeling settling in my chest. Something about this meeting felt significant, and I had no idea how much it would change our lives. The bus rumbled beneath us as we pulled away from the station, heading south toward Florida. Max had his face pressed against the window, watching the city shrink into the distance. His small fingers drummed absently on the armrest, and I could tell he was still thinking about our airport send-off. I leaned closer. "You okay, buddy?" He hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I guess." I sighed, ruffling his hair. "Listen, I know today wasn't easy, but you and I, we make the best of things." Max offered a weak smile. "Yeah, adventure, right?" "Exactly." James, the elderly gentleman we had just met, chuckled beside us. "I like that mindset. Life's all about perspective." I glanced at him, curiosity growing. There was something warm about him, something steady. He was dressed simply, in a light linen shirt and a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. But there was an air of quiet confidence about him. "So, what takes you to Florida, James?" I asked. He smiled, looking out the window. "A bit of work, a bit of pleasure." He glanced back at me. "And you?" "A wedding," I said, shifting in my seat. "My uncle is getting married at some big resort." "Ah, family gatherings," James mused. "They can be complicated." I let out a soft laugh. "You have no idea." James gave me a knowing look, but before he could say more, Max tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, can I show Mr. James my volcano project?" James's face lit up. "I'd love that." Max unzipped his backpack and carefully pulled out the homemade volcano, explaining in detail how it worked. As he spoke, his earlier sadness faded, replaced by excitement. James listened intently. "That's incredible, Max. You've got a sharp mind. Ever thought about engineering?" Max shrugged. "I like science, but I also like music. Mom's a music teacher." James turned to me. "A pianist?" I nodded. "And a choir director. I teach at a high school. Music and science," James mused. "A powerful combination." "Do you compose?" "Not really," I admitted. "I mean, I've dabbled, but nothing serious." "You should," James said, leaning back. "The world needs more educators who think outside the box." I smiled, though I wasn't sure what to make of his words. There was something about the way he spoke, like he saw more in me than I saw in myself. Hours passed as the bus wound its way south. Max eventually dozed off, his head resting against my shoulder. The steady hum of the road mixed with the occasional murmur of conversation from other passengers. James and I talked on and off, weaving through topics ranging from music to travel to life's unexpected turns. He had an easy way about him, like he had seen enough of the world to understand its rhythms. At one point, he pulled out a small notebook and jotted something down. I glanced at the page, catching glimpses of musical notes. "You write music?" I asked. James smiled. "Here and there. More of a hobby these days." Before I could ask more, the bus slowed for a rest stop. The driver announced a 30-minute break, and passengers began shuffling off. "Stretch your legs?" James asked. I nodded, gently nudging Max awake. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get some fresh air." The rest stop was small, a roadside diner and a gas station tucked alongside the highway. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in golden hues. James offered to grab us some snacks while Max and I sat at a picnic table. My son was quiet, stirring his juice with a straw. "What's on your mind?" I asked. Max hesitated. "Do you think Carter's gonna be mean again?" I exhaled, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, Max. But no matter what, You don't have to let him decide how you feel about yourself. Max frowned. But it's not fair. Grandma and Aunt Olivia always act like he's better. I wrapped an arm around him. You and I both know that's not true. People like them measure worth by things. But real worth? That's in who you are. Max nodded slowly. I knew the words weren't a perfect fix, but maybe they planted a seed. James returned a few minutes later, setting a bottle of water and a pack of crackers in front of Max. Fuel for the journey, he said with a wink. Max grinned. Thanks, Mr. James. James took a seat across from us. You know, Max, people like your cousin, they often act that way because they're insecure. Sometimes, the ones who put others down are the ones most afraid of being small themselves. Max thought about that for a moment, then took a sip of his juice. So, Carter's scared? James smiled. Maybe not scared, but he wants to feel important. And sometimes, making others feel small is the only way some people know how to do that. Max nodded, filing the thought away. Back on the bus, the sky outside darkened into deep blues and purples. Max curled up beside me, drifting back to sleep. James was silent for a while, lost in thought. Then, after what felt like hours, he finally spoke. Emma, can I ask you something? I glanced at him. Sure. Have you ever wanted something more? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? James gestured vaguely, beyond the day-to-day, beyond just getting by. I hesitated. I mean, I love teaching, I love music, but I guess, yeah, sometimes I wish I could do something bigger. James nodded, as if he had expected my answer. I thought so. I furrowed my brow. Why? James reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. He handed it to me, and as I turned it over, my breath caught in my throat. James Whitmore, CEO, Crescendo Innovations. Crescendo Innovations, one of the leading companies in music education and technology. I looked up at him, stunned. You, James smiled. I didn't want to bring it up too soon. But after hearing you talk about your students, your passion, I think you'd be a great fit for a project we're working on. My heart pounded. A project? He nodded. An initiative to bring innovative music programs to schools across the country. We need people who understand both music and education. I gripped the card, my mind spinning. You don't have to decide now, James said, his tone gentle. But think about it. I stared at the card, the weight of possibility settling over me. For years, I had accepted my place content with scraping by, making do. But now, a door I never even considered was swinging open. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered, what if I walked through it? The bus continued its steady journey south, the low hum of the engine filling the quiet night. Max was asleep against my shoulder, his small breaths rhythmic and peaceful. My fingers traced the edges of the business card. James had given me, my mind turning over his words, an opportunity, a real one. I had spent so many years just surviving, balancing bills, lesson plans, and Max's needs that I had stopped imagining anything more. But here it was, right in my hands. James must have noticed the turmoil on my face, because he spoke softly beside me. You don't have to decide tonight, Emma. I exhaled, giving a small nod. It's just unexpected. He smiled, knowingly. The best opportunities usually are. I studied him in the dim light. There was something about him, something calm, certain. He carried himself like someone who had spent years learning not just about business, but about people. What made you start Crescendo Innovations? I asked. James leaned back, staring out at the dark landscape passing by the window. I grew up in a small town. We didn't have much, but there was this old piano in my elementary school's music room. The teacher let me stay after class to practice. He smiled faintly. That piano changed my life. Music gave me a way to understand the world. When I got older, I realized how many kids never get that chance. So I decided to change that. I absorbed his words, feeling a strange sense of connection. I understand that, I murmured. Music was always my escape too. James glanced at me. And now you help kids find their own escape. I shrugged. I try. But most of the time, I feel like I'm just keeping my head above water. His expression turned thoughtful. Maybe it's time to do more than just stay afloat. I looked down at Max, his face peaceful in sleep. My heart ached. Could I really take a leap like this? Change everything? Or had I been making myself small for so long that I didn't even know how to think bigger anymore? The next morning, the bus pulled into Miami just as the sun was rising, casting a warm golden glow over the city. I shook Max gently awake. "Hey buddy, we're here." He blinked, rubbing his eyes. "Already?" I smiled. 12 hours isn't as long when you're asleep. James gathered his small bag, standing with ease despite the long trip. "I'll see you at the resort?" I nodded. "Yeah, thanks for everything." He gave me a knowing look. It's only just beginning. Max and I made our way through the crowded station, the city already alive with early morning traffic. A resort shuttle was waiting outside, its glossy exterior starkly different from the bus we had just spent half a day on. As we climbed in, I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Olivia. "Finally made it. We've been here for days already. Hope the bus wasn't too miserable." I clenched my jaw but didn't respond. There was no point. Olivia thrived on feeling superior, and nothing I said would change that. Instead, I focused on Max, who was staring wide-eyed at the tall palm trees lining the streets. "This place looks fancy," he whispered. I chuckled. "It is." When we arrived at the resort, my mother was already waiting in the lobby. Her eyes flicked over me quickly, as if assessing whether the bus ride had left me looking appropriately exhausted. "You're here," she said, forcing a smile. "We are," I replied, matching her energy. "Your room's already assigned," she continued. "Olivia and Ethan are in one of the oceanfront villas. We put you in one of the side buildings, but it's still nice." Of course, always the afterthought. Max didn't seem to notice. He was too busy staring at the enormous chandelier hanging from the ceiling, its crystal strands reflecting tiny rainbows across the marble floor. "Where's Carter?" he asked. Mom hesitated. "Oh, he's off with his dad on the jet skis." Max's face fell slightly, but he didn't say anything. I placed a hand on his back. "Let's check out our room, okay?" That evening, a pre-wedding dinner was held at the resort's open-air restaurant, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and citrus. Max and I arrived a little late, and as we approached the long table where our family was seated, I heard Olivia's voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "And of course, Carter is excelling in his program. He's always been ahead of the curve." I rolled my eyes before stepping into view. "Sorry we're late." Olivia turned, a perfectly rehearsed smile on her lips. "Emma, you made it." I slid into the seat across from her. "Yep, managed to survive the terrible bus ride." Her smile twitched, but before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. "Emma, Max." I turned to see James approaching, looking effortlessly put together in a crisp button-up and slacks. A ripple of confusion moved through the table. My mother's eyebrows shot up. Olivia, for the first time in her life, was speechless. James pulled out the chair beside me. "Mind if I join you?" I swallowed my amusement at Olivia's wide-eyed stare. "Not at all." He nodded politely at the rest of the family. "James Whitmore." My mother's face turned a shade paler. "Whitmore," she echoed. James smiled. "I run Crescendo Innovations. Emma and I met on the way here." Olivia blinked. "You wait. You run Crescendo?" I couldn't help but smirk. Olivia was clearly scrambling to process the fact that the man she'd probably have ignored in any other setting was someone important. James turned to me. "We should set a time tomorrow to go over details." Before I could respond, Olivia's voice cut in. "Details? About what?" James sipped his wine. "A project Emma might be involved in." The silence that followed was delicious. My mother recovered first, her expression shifting into one of forced warmth. "Well, that's wonderful, isn't it, Olivia?" Olivia's smile looked painful. "Of course." "How unexpected." Max, oblivious to the tension, leaned toward James. "Mom's a really good teacher." James grinned. "I know." The rest of dinner was a blur of polite conversation, but I could feel the shift. Olivia was off balance. My mother was suddenly interested in my career. Ethan, usually disinterested, was eyeing James like he wanted to figure out just how powerful he was. For the first time in years, I wasn't the family embarrassment. I was something else entirely. And I had a feeling Olivia didn't like it. The air was thick with tension by the time dinner ended. My mother was suddenly overly attentive, Olivia was stiff, and Ethan was eyeing James with a mix of curiosity and calculation. I knew exactly what was happening. James had unknowingly thrown a wrench into the delicate hierarchy Olivia had built. For years, I had been the struggling single mom, the one who barely scraped by while Olivia flaunted her perfect life. But now someone important had taken an interest in me, and Olivia hated that. As we got up from the table, she moved beside me, her voice just low enough for only me to hear. "You never mentioned knowing someone like him." I smirked. I didn't know I needed to. She let out a tight laugh. Well, it's surprising. I mean, it's great, of course. But are you sure this is something you can handle? There it was. The doubt, the subtle jab at my capability. I turned to face her fully, keeping my voice light. Funny. James seems to think I can. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Of course. I was just thinking of you, Emma. I wouldn't want you to get your hopes up. I held her gaze. Don't worry. My hopes are just fine. She forced a chuckle and patted my arm like she hadn't just tried to undercut me. We should catch up tomorrow, maybe before your meeting with James. The first knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to gauge how much of a threat this opportunity was to her carefully curated narrative. I shrugged. Maybe. Depends on my schedule. Olivia's jaw tightened ever so slightly. She wasn't used to me being the one who was unavailable. I walked away before she could say anything else, feeling lighter than I had in years. The next morning, Max and I ate breakfast on our small balcony, the ocean stretching endlessly before us. He was happily munching on pancakes when he looked up. Mom? Yeah, bud? Why does Aunt Olivia act like that? I sighed. Like what? He pushed his fork through the syrup. Like she's better than you. I let out a soft chuckle. Because she thinks she is. But why? I thought about it for a moment. Some people need to feel important. And sometimes, the only way they know how to do that is by making others feel small. Max frowned. That's dumb. I smiled. Yeah, it is. He went back to his pancakes, and I went back to my coffee. But inside, I was still mulling over his question. Why did Olivia act like that? Was it insecurity? Competition? Or had she just convinced herself that her life choices were the right ones, and mine were mistakes? I shook the thought away. I had more important things to focus on, like my meeting with James. At precisely 10 a.m., I walked into the resort cafe, where James had suggested we meet. He was already there, looking relaxed with a cup of coffee in front of him. Morning, he greeted, motioning for me to sit. Morning. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. So, tell me more about this project. James smiled. It's an initiative to modernize music education. We want to create programs that actually engage students, not just force them through outdated curriculums. We're looking for educators who understand both music and how kids learn. I nodded slowly, intrigued. And where do I fit in? James leaned forward slightly. We need someone with fresh ideas. Someone who's actually in the classrooms, seeing what works and what doesn't. You've got the passion, the experience, and the perspective. That's rare. I swallowed. This was real. He wasn't just being polite, he meant it. And the job itself? I asked carefully. It would start with development, working with our team to shape the curriculum. Eventually, you'd be training other educators, helping roll it out nationwide. My heart pounded. This was huge. And what about? I hesitated. Salary? James smiled. We can more than double what you're making now, plus travel opportunities and creative input. I nearly choked on my coffee. James chuckled. Good surprise? I nodded, still processing. Yeah, just a lot to take in. He gave me a moment before speaking again. I don't need an answer today. Take the time you need. I exhaled, nodding. Thank you, I appreciate that. James studied me for a second, then smiled. You know, I had a feeling about you. The moment you started talking about your students, I laughed lightly. And what feeling was that? That you're meant for bigger things. His words settled deep in my chest, something stirring inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Maybe he was right. I was still lost in thought when I returned to the poolside, where the rest of the family had gathered. My mother waved me over, her expression unusually warm. So, how was your meeting? She asked, too casually. I glanced at Olivia, who was pretending not to listen. It went well, I said simply. Mom pressed on, and I shrugged. We'll see. Olivia finally spoke, her voice laced with forced curiosity. What exactly would you be doing? I took a sip of my iced tea, playing along, just discussing some education projects. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. That's interesting. Before I could respond, Carter came running up to our table, laughing. Mom, guess what? Dad's renting jet skis for us later. Olivia beamed. That's wonderful, honey. Carter turned to Max. You probably won't get to ride them, though. It's kind of expensive. My son flinched. I set my drink down. Actually, Max and I have plans. Carter smirked. What? Like more bus rides? Max looked down, his cheeks burning. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm. No, we're going to explore Miami. Maybe take a boat tour, Carter shrugged. Sounds boring. I leaned closer, dropping my voice just for him. You know what really sounds boring? Spending your whole life thinking money makes you important. Carter's face scrunched in confusion, like he couldn't quite process the idea. Olivia's head snapped toward me, but before she could say anything, I smiled sweetly. Enjoy your jet skis. Then I turned to Max. Come on, kiddo. Let's go see the city. As we walked away, Max looked up at me. Mom? Yeah? His small hand gripped mine. That was awesome. I grinned. Yeah, buddy. It really was. Behind us, I could feel Olivia's eyes burning into my back. She had spent years keeping me in my place, but that place didn't exist anymore. The Miami sun was high overhead as Max and I strolled through the lively streets. The salty breeze mixed with the smell of food carts selling empanadas and fresh fruit. And for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt truly free. No backhanded comments, no forced conversations, just me and my son, exploring the world. Max sipped on a fresh mango smoothie, his eyes darting between the colorful murals that covered the buildings. Mom, can we take pictures? I smiled. Of course. He pulled out his small tablet, snapping photos of everything from street performers to a woman selling handmade bracelets. As he focused on capturing the moment, I found myself watching him. For so long, I had worried about Max, about how he saw himself in comparison to Carter, about how our family treated us. But now, watching him light up at something as simple as a new place, I realized something. Max didn't need them. He never had. And maybe, just maybe, neither did I. By the time we returned to the resort, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. The pool area was bustling with guests, and from across the deck, I spotted Olivia lounging under an umbrella, sipping a cocktail. She saw us before I could turn away. Emma, there you are. Her voice was too cheerful, too forced. Max and I walked over, and before I could even sit, Olivia was already digging in. So, how was your boat tour? I shrugged. It was great. Max loved it. She hummed, swirling her drink. You know, I was thinking, since things seem to be going so well for you, maybe we should talk about opportunities. I raised a brow. Opportunities? Olivia leaned in slightly. For Carter. Ah, there it was. I crossed my arms. What about him? Well, she said, in her usual sweet yet condescending tone, you're meeting with James, and since he clearly likes you, I thought maybe you could put in a good word. I blinked, stunned for a second. Wait, I said slowly. You want me to ask James to help Carter? Olivia tilted her head, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. You know how competitive these programs are. It never hurts to have connections. I let out a short laugh. Wow. So let me get this straight. You've spent years looking down on me. And now that I might actually have something valuable, you want me to help you? Olivia stiffened. That's not fair, Emma. I'm thinking about Carter. I shook my head. No, you're thinking about winning. You want to make sure your perfect little world stays intact. She scoffed. Oh, come on. Don't act like you wouldn't do the same for Max if you had the chance. I met her gaze evenly. The difference is, I wouldn't treat people like they're beneath me until I needed something from them. Her expression faltered just slightly. Emma, I'm just trying to help my son. I sighed. And I'm trying to help mine. She watched me for a long moment before exhaling sharply. You know what? Forget it. I smiled. Already did. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. Max followed beside me, looking up with wide eyes. Mom, I glanced down. Yeah, that was awesome. I laughed, ruffling his hair. It was, wasn't it? That evening, I got a message from James asking if I wanted to meet again before the wedding. We sat on the outdoor patio of the resort cafe, the soft sound of waves crashing in the distance. He sipped his coffee, watching me carefully. You seem lighter, he noted. I smirked. It's been an eventful day, James chuckled. I can imagine. Then he leaned forward slightly. So, have you thought about my offer? I took a deep breath. Yeah, I have. He waited, patient as ever, and I exhaled, feeling the weight of my decision settle. I think I'm ready. James smiled. Good. I hesitated. It's a big change, though. I mean, I've spent my whole life in one place. What if? James held up a hand. Emma. I stopped. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready. I swallowed, nodding slowly. You're right, he grinned. I usually am. I laughed, shaking my head. Modest, too. James lifted his coffee. It's part of my charm, I smiled, looking out over the ocean. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just getting by. I was stepping forward, and it felt incredible. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early, stepping out onto the balcony just as the sun was beginning to rise. Max was still asleep, curled up under the blankets. I watched him for a moment, my heart full. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a while. Hello? I smiled. Hey, Dad. There was a brief pause before his voice softened. Emma, it's good to hear from you. We hadn't spoken much over the years, not because we didn't care, but because my mother had always controlled the narrative. She made the calls. She planned the visits. But now, I wanted to change that. I just wanted to say hi, I said. And I think I'm moving for a new job. My father's voice brightened. That's great, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. One swallowed the lump in my throat. Thanks, Dad. We talked for a little while longer, and when I hung up, I felt lighter. The wedding was beautiful, grand, elegant, everything my uncle and his new wife wanted. But for me, the real moment wasn't in the vows or the first dance. It was later when I stood with Max on the beach, the waves lapping at our feet. He looked up at me, his expression thoughtful. Mom, yeah? Are we gonna be okay? I crouched down so we were eye level. Better than okay. Max smiled. Good. I pulled him into a hug, holding him close. For years, I had let other people define me. I had let my family's opinions shape how I saw myself. But not anymore. I was finally taking control. And this was just the beginning. The wedding ended in a whirlwind of music, laughter, and champagne toasts. As my family danced under the golden lights of the resort, I sat back and watched, feeling more like an outsider than ever before. But for the first time, I was okay with that. Max was off playing by the beach, kicking up sand with some of the other kids. He had bounced back quickly from Carter's usual jabs, proving once again that his resilience was stronger than their pettiness. I turned my attention back to the celebration, my gaze settling on Olivia and my mother. They were laughing with a group of guests, perfectly poised, effortlessly charming. For years I had let their approval or lack of it define my worth. Now, their opinions felt smaller, like background noise, instead of the main narrative. James appeared beside me, hands in his pockets. Not dancing? I smirked. Not really my thing. He nodded toward Max. Your kid's got some serious energy. I smiled. He does. He's excited for what's next. James studied me. And you? I exhaled, letting my shoulders relax. Yeah, I think I am too. A slow smile spread across his face. Good. The music shifted to something softer. Couples moving onto the dance floor. James glanced at me. What about now? I chuckled. Are you asking me to dance? He shrugged, teasing. Think of it as part of your new beginning. I hesitated for only a moment before placing my hand in his. All right, but if I step on your foot, it's your fault for asking. James laughed. Deal. As we moved onto the dance floor, I caught Olivia watching from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but I didn't linger on it. She had spent enough time living in my head. Tonight wasn't about her. It was about me. The next morning, I woke up early, stepping onto the balcony to take in the last bits of ocean air before our departure. The resort was quieter now, guests still asleep or nursing their post-wedding exhaustion. I checked my phone and saw a message from James. Safe travels. We'll talk soon. I smiled, typing back a quick response. Max stirred inside, stretching his arms with a sleepy yawn. Morning, he mumbled. Morning, kiddo. He blinked at me. Are we really moving? I sat on the edge of his bed. Yeah, it's a big change, but I think it's a good one. Max thought for a second, then nodded. As long as we're together, I don't care where we go. I ruffled his hair. That's my boy. At the airport, we stood in the same terminal where, just days ago, Olivia and my mother had laughed about our bus ride. Now, everything was different. I spotted Olivia near the check-in counter, her face tight with stress as she spoke with Ethan. He looked agitated, arms crossed, nodding sharply as she spoke. I had no idea what they were arguing about, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Max and I approached our gate, ready for our flight home, our last flight home. After this, we'd be on to something new, something bigger. Max tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, look." He pointed to a large coach bus parked outside the terminal, identical to the one we had taken to Florida. I stared at it for a long moment, the memories of that trip flashing in my mind. Meeting James, the long conversations, the realization that I wanted more for us. I smiled. "Sometimes," I murmured, "taking the longer road leads you exactly where you need to be." Max grinned. "Like an adventure." "Exactly." And with that, we boarded our plane, ready for the next chapter of our lives. The view from our new apartment stretched out over the city skyline, a far cry from the cramped space we had left behind. Max was sitting on the floor, putting the finishing touches on a science project. "Done," he announced proudly. I leaned over to look. "That's incredible, Max," he beamed. "I think my teacher's gonna love it." I ruffled his hair. "Of course she will." My phone buzzed. It was an email from James, confirming next week's workshop. I had spent the last year working with Crescendo Innovations, helping reshape music education in ways I had never imagined. We had traveled, built programs, and made an impact. And most importantly, I had stopped waiting for approval that I never needed in the first place. Max looked up at me. "Mom? Yeah?" His eyes sparkled. "Are we happy?" I exhaled, smiling as I looked around at everything we had built. "Yeah, kiddo, we are." Story 2. In a Manhattan residential building, Amy Wilson was focused on a design project while she sat at her desk, with a deadline approaching. Her copper-colored hair gleamed in the fading sunlight that streamed through the window. She was using her graphic tablet to make last-minute changes. As a self-employed graphic designer working from home, her workstation was tidy yet inspiring. When her husband Richard got home, the front door opened and the sound of keys jangled. "I'm back, Amy," he said, his voice a little worn out. "Greetings from home." Amy smiled warmly as she turned around. "How did your day go?" Richard relaxed on the couch after untying his necktie. As he poured himself a bottle of water, he said, "The typical 2 client meetings, 1 team meeting, and mountains of paperwork. What about you?" "I'm almost done designing the new client's logo." Amy presented him her work, a few tweaks added, with pride. "Tomorrow, I should be able to turn it in." At a large insurance firm, Richard had established a prosperous career as a sales manager. He was tall, had a powerful build, and was a kind person. Both his clients and coworkers trusted him at work. He fell in love with Amy right away after meeting her 5 years prior at a party thrown by a mutual acquaintance. Amy was attracted to Richard's genuineness and generosity, while he was enthralled by Amy's directness and inventiveness. For the most part, their marriage went well. Even though they loved their jobs, they spoke about having kids someday. Beverly, Richard's mother, was the only person who cast a shade on their relationship. Richard casually remarked, "Oh, by the way," Mom called, missing the small clouding of Amy's countenance. "She brought up your upcoming birthday. She claims to have a unique present for you." Amy made an effort to keep smiling. How considerate of her. Her voice had a hint of anxiety as she spoke. 15 years had passed since Beverly's husband, John, passed away. Although she appeared to be refined and lovely, she had a strong spirit and a keen mind. She felt that no one could ever take away her love for her only son, Richard, who was the center of her universe. Despite her outward politeness, Beverly had remained frigid toward Amy since the start of Richard and Amy's marriage. Amy could see that Beverly viewed her as the one who had taken her son by making snide comments, giving too much affection, or making little complaints. Amy was always apprehensive with Beverly. Richard added in an optimistic tone, "Mom really seems to want to improve her relationship with you. This present might be an indication of peacemaking." Amy held back a sigh. Richard always made an effort to think positively about his mother. Though it occasionally caused him to become blind, it was one of his qualities. "Maybe," she replied. "Did she explain the gift to you?" "It's a secret," she said. "You'll be surprised, though," she said. Amy was nervous, but she grinned. Most of the time, Beverly felt uneasy about her surprises. Nevertheless, she remained calm for Richard's sake. On her birthday, she commented, "I'm looking forward to it." Amy and Richard's house was the scene of a small celebration, attended by friends and family. Being at her own apartment with friends soothed Amy, despite her nervousness. When the doorbell rang at about 3 in the afternoon, Richard answered it to find Beverly standing there, wearing a pricey tweed suit and her silver hair nicely set. She radiated queenly dignity. "I appreciate you coming." Richard gave her a hug. "I would definitely come. Amy's big day is today." With a flawless response, Beverly turned to face Amy. "Amy, happy birthday." She gave her a cheek kiss. Her perfume had an overpowering, somewhat oppressive smell. Amy said courteously, "Thank you, Beverly. Now, everybody." To get everyone's attention, Beverly's voice was increased. "Come on outside and see what I got, Amy. Come on, everyone." Curious, people followed her out to the street in front of the apartment. A scarlet Mercedes-Benz S-Class, spanking new, was parked there. Amy gasped, gleaming in the sunlight. Although it was undeniably a wonderful automobile, she couldn't help but sense that Beverly's gift was intended to be controlled and show off. "Are you fond of it?" Beverly's voice was lovely as she inquired. "It is the most recent model. It was custom ordered for me." While those in their immediate vicinity showed their appreciation, she gave the keys to Amy. She smiled and added, "You should be thankful." Even still, the tone of the statements was one of authority. "It's fantastic. Thank you." As everyone around her had anticipated, Amy answered. She kept the grin she had developed as a professional designer, even while complicated emotions whirled inside of her. Richard was grinning with delight and astonishment. "This is very incredible." He gave Beverly another hug. "What do you think, Amy? Isn't it amazing?" Amy glanced at the vehicle with a nagging unease. Why this extravagant present was given? Indeed. "In all honesty," she said, "it's unbelievable. That Beverly Wilson would offer anything without expecting anything in return was, in fact, unthinkable." When Amy got back from shopping in her little car, a week after the birthday celebration, she glanced up at the shiny red Mercedes-Benz, parked in the apartment parking lot next to her. With hefty shopping bags in both hands, the automobile, which she had never driven, kept shining at the corner of her eye, like a red warning light. Amy assumed Richard had already questioned her about why she wasn't utilizing his mother's gift many times as she made her way to the elevator. She had consistently offered justifications such as "it takes time to get used to it," or "my current car is fine." She was unable to reveal the true cause to him. She didn't think this present was given out of true kindness. Richard had left a message on the answering machine back in the apartment. "Tonight, I'll be late. I'm having a client supper. Do not be concerned. I cherish you." Amy dropped her shopping bags and peered out the window at the red Mercedes. This, she believed, was her opportunity. "I have time to examine the vehicle." Amy returned to the parking lot, determined. She went to the car after removing the keys. After confirming that no eagle-eyed security cameras were present, Beverly would go that far, she didn't suppose. But for safety's sake, the driver's door was opened by her. The scent of opulent leather filled her nostrils as she sat inside. Everything seemed flawless. The control panel's elegant design, the seat's texture, and the dashboard's sheen. However, she sensed a problem when she started the engine and put the key in the ignition. The sound of the engine sounded a little off. Her hands felt a little sensation that passed through the steering wheel. Amy was unable to determine whether this was typical because she had no prior experience with expensive automobiles. "Maybe it's all in my head," she thought. "After all, I'm not an expert on Mercedes." She looked at a number of features as she browsed the dashboard menu. She discovered that a user profile was already created when she attempted to examine the navigation system and accessed the settings panel. Naturally, Amy whispered a new automobile for Beverly Wilson, but she had already entered her own details. Curious, Amy looked over the navigation history. It included the addresses of a number of upscale shopping centers, Beverly's house, and Amy and Richard's flat. She looked into it more and found that the system settings included a vehicle tracking option. It was activated. "What is this?" Amy furrowed her brows. As she read the description, she discovered that this feature relayed real-time position data from the automobile to a certain smartphone app. Wilson was the name of the associated account. Anxiety started to grow. Amy looked through the options more and discovered an option for the recording feature. This technology was activated and configured to automatically record and submit talks within the vehicle to the same account. God, oh God. Amy took a breath. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. With shaking hands, Beverly had planned to keep an eye on her and Richard. Amy pulled out the car's handbook from the glove box, turning the pages of the hundreds. She looked up details on the engine's typical state. According to the statement, The S-Class engine is particularly renowned for being silent, with virtually no vibration detected while it is at rest. It was obvious that the shaking she had experienced was not normal. Amy paid close attention to the engine once more. In fact, a somewhat erratic sound was audible to further explore. Amy pulled out her phone and browsed through a number of forums while searching for Mercedes-Benz S-Class engine abnormalities. She discovered that major issues may arise from engine faults. She then verified the car's history by looking at the dashboard's vehicle information panel. She found something startling. It was not a brand new automobile. 6 months have passed since the selling date. "This isn't possible," Amy said. Beverly had stated that she had specifically ordered it to look into it more and that it was the newest model. Amy took note of the vehicle's VIN and used her smartphone to access a vehicle history report service. The awful reality came to light after she downloaded the report and paid the price using her credit card. In reality, the vehicle was utilized and involved in an accident. Past. The front end sustained significant damage in a collision on the highway involving the previous owner. Although it had been fixed, important engine components were still missing. The paper cautioned about the possibility of major issues while driving fast or over long distances. Amy's hands shook. This was more than just a kind present. Beverly had provided her a risky vehicle and planned to keep an eye on her whereabouts. In the worst scenario, Amy may be involved in a terrible collision with this automobile. After shutting off the engine, she exited the vehicle. Amy considered how to explain this terrible revelation to Richard as the cool night air brushed her face. He had a great affection for his mother. Would he fall for such a plot? Amy returned to the flat and began collecting evidence. She printed the report, took pictures, and took screenshots of the monitoring system settings and recording feature. To prove the truth to Richard, she would need indisputable proof. Amy lay in bed that night and gazed up at the ceiling. She had to take action to save herself and her spouse now that she was aware of the actual intent behind Beverly's gift. She still had to be careful, though. She needed to figure out how to get out of this perilous predicament without offending Richard. Richard was drinking coffee on a Sunday morning as he stood by the window, gazing down at the parking lot. His gaze landed on the early sun shining on the red Mercedes-Benz. He sipped his coffee slowly while thinking. It's peculiar. Amy was seated on the sofa when he turned to face her. "You haven't driven that automobile once in the 2 weeks since we got it." Amy carefully considered her comments as she raised her head from her laptop screen. "Indeed. It will take some time for me to adjust. Mom has been phoning nearly daily." "Does Amy like the car?" Richard said, taking a seat next to Amy on the sofa. "Is anything wrong? She seems worried." Amy inhaled deeply. She had spent the last 2 days figuring out when to be honest with Richard. There was no denying the proof she had collected. The vehicle's history of accidents, engine issues, and most horrifying of all, the surveillance system that was installed. However, it was challenging to bring up this matter, given Richard's bond with his mother. Amy answered cautiously, "I think Beverly thinks I'm happy with the car. However, you're not. Are you?" Richard's eyes were fixed on Amy's. "You're keeping something from me. When it comes to my mother, you have recently appeared apprehensive and even more uptight." Amy's jaw tightened. "There's an issue with that automobile, Richard." "An issue? What sort of issue is it?" "Showing you is simpler than explaining." Amy got to her feet. "Let's get to the vehicle." Silently, they made their way down to the parking lot. Amy felt her heart racing. She realized that what was going to happen may permanently alter Richard's life. Amy pulled out the keys and stood in front of the red Mercedes in the parking lot. "See for yourself by getting inside," I said. She said. Richard opened the driver's door, his face doubtful. "What precisely am I trying to find?" "First, turn on the engine," Amy said while occupying the passenger seat. Richard started the engine by inserting the key into the ignition. Although he wasn't a skilled driver, he had the opportunity to travel in high-end vehicles for business and was aware of the typical state of a Mercedes-Benz class. His face clouded. "It's an odd sound," he replied. "I am also able to sense vibrations." Amy responded, "That's not the sound of a new car, particularly for a high-end vehicle." Richard scowled as he felt the faint engine vibrations and put his palm on the steering wheel. "Mom stated it was new, but it's certainly off. First, let's talk about it." Amy pulled up the car history report on her smartphone. She had come to her rescue. "Take a look at this." Taking the smartphone, Richard gazed at the screen. Amy could see his face losing its color. "Here it is." His voice faltered. "This vehicle has been in an accident. It was sold 6 months ago, according to history." "Indeed. It's an accident. Repaired, second-hand automobile, rather than a brand new one," Amy whispered softly. "The engine's key components weren't correctly fixed. Long-distance driving is risky with it." Richard gave Amy a disbelieving glance. How did this occur? But that's not all. Amy grabbed the dashboard screen and accessed the settings for the navigation system. "Take a look at this." Beverly Wilson's profile with voice recording and car tracking turned on was shown on the settings screen. Richard's face became blank. "Here it is." He stammered out what he was saying. "It's a surveillance gadget." "Indeed. This automobile is configured to record every discussion and send it to Beverly's account," Amy remarked, "and her smartphone is continuously receiving position data from the automobile." Richard's hands dropped to his knees from the steering wheel. He appeared to be attempting to arrange his thoughts as he gazed out the window. Mom, why would she? He couldn't think of anything to say. Amy grasped her spouse's hand. "I don't want to blame Beverly, Richard, but this is obviously deliberate. Providing an accident-damaged automobile that looks brand new while keeping tabs on our whereabouts and communications." Richard's cheeks started to flush with anger. "This is not acceptable. Mom lied. That much is obvious. But it's unbelievable. Why would Mom act in this way?" Amy gave an honest response. "I don't know that either. However, our privacy is being infringed, and this automobile is unsafe. I believe we ought to have it looked at by a specialist." With a heavy sigh, Richard switched off the engine. "Without notifying Mom, let's take it right away to a separate repair business." Richard abruptly halted as they were getting out of the car and making their way back to the apartment. "For what duration have you been aware of this?" "A couple of days," Amy answered. "I wasn't sure how to express my desire to keep your friendship with Beverly intact." Amy's shoulder was touched by Richard. "You made the correct decision. I needed to know the truth, even though this is surprising." There was determination in his eyes. "I will need to reevaluate my connection with my mother, if she truly done this," Richard muttered in a low voice as he rode the elevator. "My mother has had a significant role in my life since I was a little child. Although I occasionally felt she was overly cautious, I didn't anticipate her taking things this far." He forced a sour grin. "Mom always held my spouse to a high standard. However, I am still proud of the decision I made to choose you." Amy gave her husband's hand a squeeze. "Together, we will overcome this obstacle." When he got back to the apartment, Richard called a trustworthy local vehicle repair business. "Tomorrow morning, I want you to go look at an automobile. Is it possible?" He just mentioned that there were safety issues without going into specifics. Richard hung up and looked at Amy with a sorrowful grin. "Thank goodness you didn't operate the vehicle." Amy put her head on her husband's arm and snuggled into him, as if something had occurred. "What will we do at this point?" "We must first obtain a precise evaluation of the vehicle's state," Richard stated resolutely. After that, a talk with Mom. The room was filled with a red glow as the evening light came in through the window. They were reminded of the perilous present that was parked in the lot below by that red light. Amy and Richard got up early the following morning and took the red Mercedes to Morrison Auto Repair. Richard had made an appointment with a respectable small store. They were both silent, fearing the worst. When you get to the repair shop, they were met by an elderly man with tasteful gray hair. "My name is Tom Morrison, the person you contacted." He held out his hand and said, "Wilson, Richard. And this is Amy, my wife." Richard gave a tense response. "We are worried about this vehicle." Morrison looked dignifiedly at the red Mercedes. "Which symptoms do you have?" "It's a strange engine sound," Amy said. "Additionally, we want to make sure that this is a brand new vehicle." Morrison arched an eyebrow, but he didn't ask any more questions. "Starting work right now. First, let's diagnose the PC. After that, we'll examine the engine in more detail." Richard and Amy waited in the office area of the store. I'm holding a coffee cup. Richard's gaze was fixed on the window. "It's unbelievable that my mother would act in such a manner." At last he spoke, "Particularly something that might endanger your safety." Amy covered his hand with hers. "As yet, we are unable to make any firm judgments. Let's await the diagnosis of Mr. Morrison." An hour or so later, Morrison went back to work. He was carrying a comprehensive diagnostic report, and his face was serious. He sat down and said, "I need to tell you both something. This vehicle is not brand new. At least 9 months have passed since the product was manufactured." Leaning forward, Richard assessed the engine's state. Morrison let out a long sigh. It's risky, to be honest. A number of important components are not original parts with high speed or prolonged use, and the engine mounts have been incorrectly rebuilt. The engine can stop working altogether. In the worst situation, it may stop while driving, which could result in a dangerous collision. Amy felt a chill go down her spine. She had suspected this very thing, Morrison went on. In the automobile, I also discovered odd technological gadgets. A surveillance gadget connected to the navigation system was another paper he prepared. It's really advanced. An amateur would never install it. Richard's face lost its color. Thus, it was implanted on purpose. Certainly, Morrison nodded. Used vehicle businesses don't usually install these types of equipment. It must have been carefully ordered by someone. Amy saw Richard's face stiffen. Anger and despair were mixed together in a complicated way. There. Thank you, Richard murmured softly. Mr. Morrison, is it possible to get this in writing? Morrison demonstrated grasp of the specific condition and associated risks. Additionally, I advise you to leave the automobile here till you make a decision. Driving it in this state is not advised. Richard took the elevator back, left the keys with Morrison, and then struck the wall out of the blue. Why? His voice shook with grief and rage. Why would Mom act in this way? Amy gave her hubby a hug. She didn't know the answers. All she could do was help his injured heart. I need to see my mother right now, Richard stated with a determined tone. Richard and Amy went to Beverly's opulent residence that afternoon. Richard remained silent in the car, and Amy didn't interrupt him until he got to Beverly's building. They were met in the entry hall by the doorman. Welcome, Mr. and Miss S. Wilson. With a smile, he said, Should I tell Miss S. Wilson about you? No, it's unexpected. Richard feigned a smile. Seeing us will make Mother very happy. They stood in front of Beverly's penthouse door, after riding the opulent elevator to the top floor. Beverly herself opened the door after Richard rang the doorbell. Richard, Amy, what a sweet surprise. She pretended to be delighted, but her grin vanished as soon as she saw the severe looks on their faces. Is there a problem? Let's have a conversation inside, Richard said in a chilly tone. Beverly ushered them into the living room with trepidation. Do you want me to prepare tea? Thank you, but no, Amy answered softly. Richard pulled out Morrison's diagnostic report once the three of them were sitting on the sofa. We must discuss the automobile you bought Amy as a gift, Mom. Beverly stiffened for a second, then calmed herself. That automobile is amazing. Was Amy pleased? It was new, you claimed. Richard's gaze met hers directly. Naturally, Beverly grinned. I placed a special order for the newest model. The diagnostic report was put in front of her by Richard. That is untrue. His voice faltered. It is a used automobile with a history of accidents, not a brand new one. Long-distance driving might result in a major accident due to the engine's hazardous state. There was a momentary freeze on Beverly's face. That isn't possible. An authorized dealer sold it to me. And that's not all, Amy muttered. The automobile is equipped with surveillance gadgets that are programmed to capture all talks and transmit them to your smartphone. The hue of Beverly's face altered. That is absurd. She got to her feet. All I wanted to do was offer a lovely gift. Richard got up too and turned to face his mother. Mom, enough. Here is all the proof. He authored more papers. These are the records of the car's acquisition. You purchased this vehicle from a second-hand car dealer, and once it was fixed, surveillance equipment was added. Beverly's face was devoid of color. She fell back on the couch and was quiet for a long time. She glanced up at last. They had never noticed the coldness in her eyes before. She told Richard that he deserved a better lady. Mom, you're being manipulated by this woman. Richard's rage had reached a breaking point. You are the one that endangered the life of my wife, Amy. That vehicle is very secure. Beverly said there could be some problems, but nothing serious. Not lethal. Amy spoke the words in shock. According to Mr. Morrison, when traveling at a high speed, the engine may quit. What the heck? Suddenly, Beverly's voice became icy. All I wanted to do was get rid of her and make it seem like a coincidence. There was a horrible quiet in the room. Richard gazed at his mother, attempting to understand what she was saying. You attempted to murder me. Amy's voice sounded weak. Beverly gave a shrug. I didn't give it much thought. I only feared you may become frightened and quit operating the vehicle. It would then belong to Richard. She gave Richard a grin. Son, it was for you. Richard's expression was one of disdain and fear. This is it, Mom, he murmured, his voice shaking. This is where our relationship ends. Richard. Beverly got to her feet quickly. My only son is you. Would you leave me for this woman instead? This woman is not Amy, Richard stated firmly, but quietly. She is my life partner and wife. I can't call you mother anymore because you attempted to harm her. Beverly's expression twisted. This is something you'll regret. She made a threat. She is not deserving of you. Mom, goodbye. Amy's hand was taken by Richard. Don't get in touch with us. We'll speak with attorneys. Beverly made one last comment as they made their way to the door. Richard, the first, only wanted to keep you safe. Richard, however, didn't turn around. The elevator doors closed as they entered. A deep sigh escaped his lips. It's over, he murmured wearily. Amy put her husband's shoulder to her head. Are you all right? Richard gave an honest response. No, not at all. But from now on, things will improve. He gave Amy's hand a squeeze. Together, let's overcome this. A lovely sunset welcomed them as they exited the building. After a year, Amy and Richard were enjoying breakfast in their new suburban backyard. The garden's flowers were bathed in soft morning light, and the sound of birdsong was pleasing. More coffee? Richard inquired. I have a pot. Thank you. With a smile, Amy extended her cup. The new life growing inside her was evident from her round tummy. In 2 months, their daughter was to be born. Richard put his palm lightly on his wife's stomach and grinned at the slight motions he sensed, bursting with vitality. Indeed, no matter what time of day it is, she is always on the go. Amy chuckled. Similar to you. Over the preceding year, their lives had undergone significant shift. Richard started going to a psychologist to work on his connection with his mother. After the altercation, it was difficult to see the line between a mother's love and control, but treatment was assisting him in progressively overcoming his prior hardships. It was a new beginning for them to leave their flat in Manhattan and move into a large property with a garden 6 months ago. Amy kept working from home on her designs while she got ready for the baby's arrival. Although Richard was employed by the same organization, he had started to place more importance on work-life balance. Richard took a mouthful of bread and remarked, "This afternoon, I'll finish painting the baby's room. It was a great idea to combine lilac with cream. I take great delight in it as a designer." Amy left. That space will be ideal. The phone started ringing, interrupting their chat. Richard's face tightened as he glanced at the screen. Mom sent it. Amy looked at her husband's face. He and Beverly still had a difficult relationship. Richard had distanced himself since the tragedy, but he was unable to break off all contact. On the recommendation of experts, he had chosen to keep minimal communication, limiting it to a monthly phone conversation. Richard picked up the phone. He spoke for a moment, then put it down. "I would like to send something for the baby," Mom adds. "That's," he stated with a difficult face. Amy chose her words carefully. "Do not be concerned." Richard grasped his spouse's hand. "I refuse to let my mother to control us once more. I'll verify everything she sends first." Amy gave a comforting nod. It appeared that Beverly had slightly softened her attitude when she found out she had a granddaughter. Amy still didn't trust her completely, though. Quietly, she whispered, "I know you'll protect me and our child." Richard gave his wife a hug. "We are a family. We'll work together to conquer the challenges that lie ahead." A new day began as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. However, the specters of the past had not entirely vanished. Richard and Amy kept moving forward, and the impending birth of the new child would fill them with happiness and optimism.